Hi, my name is Dee Coakley and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Boundless. Boundless is a remote employment platform that allows companies to compliantly employ anyone, anywhere. I spent 10 years in COO roles with B2B SaaS companies, and during that time, I personally endured the very considerable challenges of managing employment for geographically distributed teams. And that led me to founding Boundless. Boundless acts as an employer of record. So we take care of all of the admin and compliance headaches of international employment, payroll, tax, and HR. This means that companies can get set up to employ someone in a new country in minutes rather than months. And today I'm going to talk with you about how we need to rethink hiring, employment, and people ops when we're operating in a remote world. So, what's your biggest asset? What is the key to the success of your business? How do you ensure that your business survives, thrives, and grows in uncertain times? People. There is nothing else that will ensure the success of your company more than the people that you have innovating, building, and selling for you. And so recruiting and retaining the best people is absolutely crucial for your business. We all know that talent is distributed right across the globe. There are 1 billion knowledge workers in the world right now. The notion that you will find the best possible person, the person with the right skills and experience, the right culture fit, interested in your company, prepared to accept the salary you're offering, available right now, and living within commuting distance of your physical office is beyond unlikely. If you want to work with the best, you need to be hiring from a global talent pool. Of course, getting the best candidates into your pipeline and convincing them to come and work with you is all about ensuring that you're perceived as an awesome company to work for. And that perception that you create, and hopefully it's very much about what your company genuinely represents, is how companies find the people that they need to succeed. You and your team have probably been doing great work on this, but your employer brand is not about ping pong tables. It's not great food. It's not beer on tap. This isn't about flashy offices. Right now, it's definitely not about flashy offices. How you present yourself as a great employer and what your employer brand focuses on needs to evolve in this new world. Research shows that flexibility is the #1 consideration for millennials when looking for a role. And in this new world that we're now living in, now more than ever, security and stability are hugely important to workers. And this is going to continue for the foreseeable future. So a successful employer brand needs to demonstrate that your workers will have flexibility around when and where they do their work, and that you provide secure, stable employment for your team. While right now, at least, all of us are running remote teams, remote hiring is still something new to many companies and managers, or at least international remote hiring is new to many businesses. So how do you run a successful remote recruitment process? First of all, make sure that you advertise your role as remote, but also make sure to be very specific about what remote means for your company and for this role. So are there time zone considerations? Can this person complete their work whenever works for them? Or do you need them to be available for meetings and collaboration at specific times of the day? Over the longer term, will this person need to be available to spend time in person with your team or at your head office on any kind of regular basis? These are the kinds of things you want to include on that ad. And make sure that you use remote specific jobs boards. Remember that the perfect candidate might not be looking on the board that's local to you or whatever channels you usually use for co-located hiring. And as when recruiting for any role, make sure that you use your network. Ask your team and your contacts to share across their own networks. Team members from other countries might have friends, old university pals, ex-colleagues in their home countries that could be the perfect candidates for your role. When recruiting for internationally remote candidates, you might ordinarily choose to have a standard in-person interview as part of the process, but you'll always want to include a remote interview. So what you're looking to do is to recreate your remote working environment as much as possible as part of the interview process so that you understand how comfortable this person is with that. If your team uses asynchronous video day to day, for example, then you could ask candidates to submit a video as part of their application. Make sure that you get key members of your team involved in your video interviews. Video interviews, both from the candidates and from the hiring manager's perspective, should be run like any good video meeting. I've been saying a lot recently that joining a video call without your camera on is like walking into a meeting room with a paper bag over your head. You wouldn't do it at the office, and you wouldn't be okay with a candidate doing it at an in-person interview. So don't do it online. Make sure everyone has their cameras on. You're looking to build rapport with these people. Test candidates' writing skills. Your distributed team will need to communicate with each other in writing. So ask candidates to produce written work to understand how clear and succinct they are in writing. Finally, make sure to dedicate some of your interview time to talking with the candidate about what this role, being remote, means for them and for the company. How much experience does this candidate have working remotely? What about that has worked well in the past or hasn't worked so well for them? What tools do your team use for communication and collaboration? Is this candidate familiar with them? Talk about whether your communication is mostly done synchronously or asynchronously. And are there fixed meetings that the person in this role will need to participate in? What times are those meetings at in this person's time zone? Will that work for them? A super important one is what type of work setup does this candidate have at home? Are there any barriers, challenges, or logistical issues that are likely to make working from home difficult for this person? And what can your company do to support them with these challenges? How prepared is this candidate for the potential isolation issues that come with being a remote worker? Do they have strategies for dealing with this? And talk through how your company supports remoters to avoid isolation issues. What opportunities will this person have to interact with other members of the team? After the COVID situation, will your company be regularly running team retreats and get-togethers? Talking about all of this at interview stage is just so important. So you're at a point where you have found a really awesome candidate and it's time to make a job offer. And that's when it dawns on you, what do I really know about the requirements for job offers in this candidate's country? And the questions spiral from there. Are there specific employment terms that I need to offer this worker that I might not offer to employees in our HQ country? Do I need a dual language employment agreement? What do I know about employment regulations where this person is based? Is there a specific employment legislation that I should be aware of? How do terminations work in this country? That's a key question to ask before you make any hire in a new country. How am I going to process payroll for this employee and make the payments and filings to the local tax authorities that I need to submit? And how much is this really going to cost your company? What type of employer tax contributions will you need to make in this country? And are there any other service provider fees that you need to think of? How do you even go about employing someone in another country? There are a number of potential options for running your internationally remote team. And most of you are probably using some of these options already. Those of you with more sizable international teams will probably be using some kind of mishmash of these with different setups for different countries. So the first option people often consider is employing people in other countries through the standard employment agreement that you're using in your HQ country, and just processing everyone through that payroll. Seems like a real easy solution, but you are always legally obliged to provide employees with the rights of the country that they live in. And their pay must be processed for tax purposes through the tax system of the country that they're tax resident in. So that one generally just doesn't work for people in other countries. Independent contractor agreements. Sign people up to fixed term or ongoing service agreements. This seems like another really straightforward option. And this is one that's used by so many companies. But it's very rarely legally allowed unless this is a short-term arrangement. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a moment. The next option is DIY, where you work directly with in-country accountants to register entities or establish permanent establishments and register with local tax authorities, working with translation services to produce dual language employment agreements, finding local payroll processors to handle your monthly payroll, and taking care of all of the ongoing overhead that comes with regular filings, getting to grips with local employment legislation, and understanding the terms and rights that your employees in that country are entitled to. This route can take anywhere between 10 weeks and 18 months each time you want to add someone in a new country. Costs vary hugely. It will often cost about €10,000 to get set up to employ someone in another territory. It sounds like a lot of work, right? And I've been there. I did this for 8 countries in the last few years, and it sucks. You can use intermediaries, suppliers to help you with all of this. They'll connect you to local service providers and they'll guide you through the whole process. There's a lot of work that they can't do for you. So it does still end up being a pretty involved and lengthy process. There's nothing that they can do to cut down on the times required by local government agencies. It can also be pretty costly because you have the base costs I already talked about, and then they will have their own fees. Another option is a remote employment platform, such as Boundless. This is a platform upon which you can grow out your international team. It's delivered via an employer of record solution, or third party like Boundless, with its own corporate and employment infrastructure, acts as the legal employer for your workers and manages all of your HR compliance, payroll, and tax filings on your behalf. So this ensures that your international workers are fully compliantly employed, and it automates all of the hard stuff and frees you up to focus on your core business. It also means that getting set up in a new country takes minutes rather than many months. So let's talk a little bit more about contractors. This is such a commonly used solution. People think, surely I can just sign these people up to service contracts and ignore all of the messy, expensive employment stuff. A lot of you probably currently have independent contractors working for your companies. Contracting is great. It's easy, it's quick, it reduces admin overhead, but ultimately contracting is a hack. It's okay and it works really well in certain scenarios. An allowable situation is a fixed term project, something that's not necessarily core to your business, paying based on the time it takes to complete the work. And most companies will always use fixed term contracts from time to time for very specific projects like this, and that's absolutely fine. For something that is very time boxed, where there's no permanent role for this person, most governments will look at this and say, yeah, okay, that's a legitimate contractor. But there are many scenarios where it is not okay to classify a worker as a contractor. Every government employment agency or tax authority has slightly varying criteria for what qualifies as a contract role and where someone should be classified as an employee. But broadly, there are key measures that they'll look at. They'll ask these questions. Does this person work full-time for your company? Is your company this person's only client? Do they earn their main income from your company? Do you or the management at your company direct their work? Do they use company equipment and infrastructure to produce work for you? So do they have a company laptop, a company email account? Do they regularly participate at internal meetings? If the answer to all or most of these questions is yes, then the local government, the employment authorities and the tax authorities will say that this person must be classified as an employee. The general rule of thumb is if it looks like an employee and sounds like an employee, then it's an employee. So what's the alternative to uncompliant contractors? The future of global employment is compliant. The world of remote employment was changing even before COVID. In 2019, government started to take action on remote workers being misclassified in the UK, Serbia, Canada, Spain, Germany. There are many upsides to compliantly employing your international workers. First of all, you'll avoid the wrath of these local governments and tax authorities, avoiding fines and other legal implications. You'll be nurturing a really great culture in your organisation, avoiding a two-tier system where employees feel most valued and international contractors feel like second-class citizens. This is something we hear about quite a lot, and it can create this really toxic environment. Providing stability and security to your international workers, we talked about this earlier. This is so important for workers right now, and we're going to continue to see this as being very important over the coming months and years. You are going to want to ensure that your international workers have the protection of local employment regulations, and you'll also want to ensure that they're protected by local social supports by having paid the right amounts into the local tax system. This is something that we're seeing as being really important over the last few weeks globally. And all of this will improve your employee retention rates. By running compliant employment, you're also laying the foundation for growth in the future. When your company reaches an inflection point, such as a larger funding round, the board will often expect that the company will level up, that they'll start to effectively manage this and become compliant. This is really important for any company that's preparing for exit. An acquirer that's looking to acquire talent is not looking to acquire a bundle of easily terminated service agreements. They're looking to acquire a compliantly employed, fully engaged, loyal team. And all of this adds value to your employment brand. It ensures your company's in a position to compete for the best candidates against other companies that are offering secure employment to their hires. Building a team using a hack will eventually dilute the value of your employer brand. So take care of all of this sooner rather than later. So just to quickly summarize what we've talked about today, people are your biggest asset. Recruiting, hiring, and retaining the best people is key to the success of your business. Talent is distributed right across the globe. To work with the best, you need to be hiring from a global talent pool. Implement the right remote recruitment process. Develop a considered employer brand that reflects your values as a company and that demonstrates to candidates that you're a business that offers flexibility, stability, and security. Educate yourself on the employment regulations in the countries your people are based in. Consider which option you'll use to run your international people ops. Independent contractor agreements, a DIY employer setup, intermediaries, or a remote employment platform. And remember that in rethinking employment, hiring, and people ops for a remote world, you really are laying the right foundations for future growth. So that's it from me. I am very much looking forward to your questions.
So I see one of the top voted questions there is, how do we offer perks, benefits to remote employees globally? We can support pensions through Boundless, and employers in most countries have to support pension payments to employees. So when you work with an employment platform, usually that will be something that's offered. In terms of other benefits, we will be supporting health insurance in the near future for workers wherever they're based. And we're looking at a number of options for perks. So we will be allowing employers to offer a bundle of perks to their workers, most likely something where workers can pick and choose those perks themselves. In terms of how they're taxed, if you're working with an employment platform or experts that can advise you on that, that's all taken care of. We have a blog post that we've shared recently about benefits in kind, and I'll share that in this chat when we're finished with the Q&A. So next question, examples of companies providing the services of remote employment platforms to comply with international remote hires. So Boundless, our business, this is what we focus on. We act as the legal employer for these workers. So we act as an employer of record. So if you're looking for an employment platform to support you, you want to be looking for an employer of record platform. In the US, the terminology is PEO, Professional Employer Organization. And those of you in the US, you might be more familiar with that term. When looking, you want to find an organization that has top class expertise in terms of employment regulations, international and multi-country payroll, and a company that can support you through all of that. You will probably want to work with a business that understands the sector that you're operating in and understands the expectations of employees in that sector. Myself and my co-founders, our background is tech. So we know that the customers that we work with are not looking to just give employees statutory minimums. They are looking to go beyond that and be really great employers. So it's probably important that you work with someone that really understands that, because otherwise you may find that you're just giving advice on the statutory minimums or legislation for that country rather than what you need to do to compete to be a really great employer. So what are the legal responsibilities of an employer when they use a service like the one that Boundless offers? So this is a really interesting question, and legal responsibility can vary country to country. So generally, Boundless takes on the role of the employer from a legal perspective. We ensure that our customers are being fully legally compliant when they're working with these workers. So we take care of hand-holding and educating the customers so that they don't need to worry about getting their heads around the employment regulations for the country. In some countries, there will be some legislation locally around the use of PEOs or employer of record services. And in those cases, sometimes our customer will have some responsibilities that they may not have in other countries. But generally, in terms of the compliance with employment regulations, tax filings, processing the payroll, the employer of record takes care of all of that. Insurance considerations for remote workers. This is a really good question that I actually saw come up on Twitter just over the weekend. I was chatting to someone about this. A lot of countries will insist that an employer has workers' liability insurance. Not all, but many will. It's actually relatively straightforward. Most employers will have an employer's insurance policy. It'll usually be bundled with their professional indemnity policy. And in the past, I've often taken out policies where my international workers were also covered. Sometimes the employer will want you to say what countries those people are in and give an indication of how many people you have in each of those countries. And usually you just update that information with them annually. It's pretty straightforward. How do I convince my company that they need to employ me rather than keep me as a contractor? This is something we come across quite a lot. A lot of people, individuals, will feel far more stable and secure when they're in an employed situation rather than working as an independent contractor. We have some really good blog posts. I know Irina from my team is on the chat there. I expect she'll be able to share something with you that sets out why it's important that people are employed versus working as independent contractors. It is in the employer's interests. Sometimes employers might not be aware of that. Smaller businesses may believe that it's fine to have people working as independent contractors long term. But our blog that's linked there has a number of articles that you could share with your employer to help them to understand that. Which is the most employer-friendly country that's good for employees too? So there are many countries where being an employer is very challenging. There are countries where it's very, very admin heavy, but also where it can be incredibly onerous as an employer if you end up having challenges or problems with employees. Some of the easier ones are probably the UK. It's very straightforward. The great thing about the UK is everything's very black and white. The earlier stages of establishing if an employer-employee fit is right are more flexible in the UK than somewhere like Germany, for example. That's probably one of the better ones. So do we have services similar to Payoneer, which may help to pay employees globally? So any customer of Boundless can run all of their payroll through Boundless. We take care of processing all of the payroll, making sure that the employer understands how much each employee needs to be paid, understands how much is to be paid to each of the tax authorities in each country, and Boundless takes care of the payments to the workers and to the tax authorities. So our customers get an invoice with one number on there, the full breakdown of where that number came from, but they only need to make one transfer in the HQ country's currency, and Boundless takes care of the rest. So really straightforward on the payment side. So this is an awesome question. Does the EU constitute one region to consider, or do you need to think about each member country individually? For people who have not been very involved in employing people internationally before, they're often incredibly surprised to learn how different the different EU countries are. Employment regulations are wildly different. They vary hugely from country to country. The types of rights that employees have are very, very different. So in France, for example, an employee will have the right not to be contacted outside of work hours. They have the right to not receive any emails outside of work hours. That's very unique to France. There are all kinds of schemes that can be very country specific, so things like bike to work schemes or loans for specific types of equipment. If you're employing people in the UK, a lot of those employees will have student loans that need to be repaid. That's something that you don't get somewhere like Ireland, for example. You'll need to understand how to handle them and process them through payroll. Each country is completely unique. And a lot of countries, culturally, these employee rights are held very, very dearly. So you find that although the European Union does give some guidelines around some employment terms, there's actually very little harmonization across the countries and no sign of that coming anytime soon. So that's why it's really important that you have a really good understanding of the employment regulations for a country you're entering. Government regulations in multiple countries can be a deal breaker to hire remote workers for small businesses. Any suggestions to tackle this? Absolutely. This has been my own experience in the past. I spent 10 years in COO roles with SaaS companies, and I encountered this problem. You meet an awesome candidate, or you have someone moving home to their home country, and you start to look into that country and the realities of employing someone there. It's not just incredibly daunting, it can be a huge legal risk for a company to employ people in certain countries. And it's a bigger risk when you don't understand how to compliantly employ someone there. Suggestions to tackle it, it's not easy. There is no easy answer to this, unfortunately. What I would say is try, a lot of Boundless, we're about to publish country guides for each country where we're supporting workers. There is helpful information out there on a country by country basis. It can be difficult if you're not actually engaged with the service provider. It can be difficult to know if the information you're reading is up to date. Some countries will implement new rules on an annual basis. So somewhere like the UK, taxes change annually. in France, they can change throughout the year, and without access to expertise, it's difficult to know what's most recent. No easy way, but there is a lot of helpful blog content and information out there. But I would say try to keep your number of countries you're working through as small as possible, so you really understand those countries, or work with experts who can take care of all of that for you. Next question is, there are some countries where it's very difficult and expensive to pay or to enter as a local entity. So these are two separate things, I guess. First of all, the payment. Actual cross-border payments are not a challenge. I know sometimes when I explain to people what Bandus does, they say, oh, you do payments. Could you not use one of the international money transfer services? The payment piece is not the challenge. It's understanding how much you're supposed to pay and taking care of the tax filings. And in order to make tax filings in any country, you have to be registered with the tax authority in that country. That in itself, you would imagine all you have to do is fill in a form and you'd be sent a tax number. You're approaching a government and saying, I want my workers there to be part of your tax net. I, as an employer, want to be contributing to your country's tax revenue. You think they'd make it easy. They don't. And as I said earlier, no sign of this kind of stuff changing anytime soon from governments. The tax registration piece can take up to 18 months in some countries. It takes on average about 4 or 5 months in a lot of countries, and you need to have partners to help you with that. So that's a challenge. In terms of registering entities, if you are an EU company employing someone in an EU country, you generally won't have to register an entity in that country unless you're taking doing sales through that country. But you may, depending on that person's immigration status, you may need to register a permanent establishment. If you are not an EU company, then you probably will need to register some kind of entity. So yeah, it's expensive, it's slow. Registering an entity, you're probably going to spend a minimum of €10,000 just to set that up. And then you'll have all of your ongoing expenses and admin costs. This stuff isn't easy, but it is really worthwhile to make sure that you are finding the best people in the world